You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Podcast. I have David Sacks. He's the author of a really cool book called The Revenge of Analog. In the book, when I read it, he talks about the reemergence and the resurgence of things like records, from turntables, board games, and a few other devices or pleasures or things that are considered to be analog instead of digital in our digital world. And so we're going to get into that and how he came to write the book and why these things are now popular again. So, David, thanks for coming.
Yeah, it's good to be the past tech guy on the Future Tech Podcast.
That's true. That's a good irony. So tell me a little bit about your journey. How did you even come to the concept to write a book like this?
It kind of was sort of on a personal level and on a broader level. So sort of on a personal level, I was living in Toronto, where I live now, about a dozen years ago, and my roommate and I had kind of uploaded all of our CDs to iTunes and found a way to stream them through, a router. And this was like the incredible peak of technology at the time, 2007. And very quickly, our interest in music kind of disappeared. And then shortly after that, we actually got an old turntable and a bunch of records from his parents who were sort of downsizing their house. And we really started getting into the records and the pleasure of listening to them, and not just the sonic quality, which was questionable, but just the entire experience, holding the album, looking at the album art, putting it on. All of a sudden, we were more interested in that version of playing music than we were with when we had sort of put everything into ostensibly the cloud, right? Sort of the precursor of the streaming we have today. And it made me think, and I got interested in it. And then at the same time, this was the year that the iPhone came out. So really our lives and the place of digital lives was really just about to sort of explode, right? The computer went from something in a room to something in everybody's pocket, and all the powers and services that were on that and the place that occupied. And yet I also started noticing that it wasn't just me that was getting back into things like records. It was everywhere. I was seeing record stores opening up where before they had been closing. I had friends who collected vinyl, but it was also things like bookstores, independent bookstores were opening up again. People were all of a sudden had to walk around with a Moleskine notebook or other sort of paper products. Even Polaroid cameras were having a comeback. And so there was this interesting kind of almost counterintuitive phenomenon that just right as we really started reaching this peak era of digital convenience at the time when we assumed, and everybody predicted, that the future would sort of do away with all these old versions of analog technology, suddenly those old versions of analog technology, which had been disappearing, started having a comeback and growing again. And so I really wanted to find out why that was and what that meant.
Yeah, I feel that. I experience it too. For instance, if I get a package in the mail, let's say a book, or if I go to the bookstore and I buy a book, it's a very different experience than, just downloading one or reading it on Kindle. There's a lot more permanence, and I tend to engage with it more than, just something on my hard drive. That it's weird. You just don't care about it. And I guess people, for some reason, are just geared towards the physical. There's literally a visceral appeal to having physical things you could hold and touch and experience. And I guess maybe that's part of the reason why that, these objects and these technologies are still popular.
I think so. I mean, you talked at the beginning about the digital world, but the reality is that the world is physical, right? It's a planet. We are creatures on that planet. And we relate to the world that we live in through physical means, right? We have touch and smell and hearing and all these things. And the thing that touches the most of our senses at one time is going to give us a much a deeper sort of connection to it than something that it only touches one or two of them, right? I mean, I think we assume that just because we could, simulate and condense so much stuff on, 4 square inch piece of black glass, that's all we would need. But it actually is. It shouldn't be surprising that we sort of gravitated and have gravitated back towards things that are sort of 3 dimensional and textural. And even though they have costs and downsides to them, that there is something that we want in that, right? There's this tremendous advantage to that, and that's at the heart of the Revenge of Analog.
Yeah, there were many stories you researched and went into depth on, records, Moleskine notebooks, etc. Were there other stories that didn't make it into the book that you have as an addendum or that you can talk about?
Not really. I mean, I think in recent years, because the book came out 2.5 years ago. So what's been interesting is that it wasn't some overnight success. I don't know if it's been a long time success, but the book has continued to sort of find audiences. And what's interesting is like those sort of noticeable phenomenon, like the return of record stores and bookstores and these sorts of things that were visible, like that's continued, right? Those have continued to grow. It hasn't dropped off a cliff as other people have predicted. But what's been interesting is kind of the underlying tension behind all this. The idea that, of a sort of questioning of the virtue of digital technology, that really changed from the time the book came out until now. I think that there has been a growing unease or distrust or just curiosity around, the place of digital technology in our lives and the effect of that. And that, I think, has caused a lot of people to examine in a much deeper way the role that technology has and the role of alternative technologies like analog technologies to play in sort of balancing that. And I think that desire for balance is something that sort of surprised me in the years since the book came out.
Have you done any experiments with your own life where you've tried to go without technology for a while, like, no phone for a week, or, taking a vacation where it's just in the environment with no technology around you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally pretty good with it on a fairly, micro basis. So I, typically on Saturdays or even throughout weekends, I'll try to, never turn my computer on. I certainly try to, unless I need the phone for some reason, I'm going somewhere and I got to stay in touch with my wife or I'm making plans with people. I really try to turn it off. And that's just to be able to spend more time with my kids and actually just enjoy myself without the distractions that brings and sort of stress of having that brick there, right? And on vacations, I tend to be able to do the same. Sometimes it's harder, right? If you're going to a city and you have to navigate your way around and you need to find obscure addresses or things, you need that, it's helpful to have the map of the GPS there. And so you try to use that, but without using other sorts of services. Because again, it's sort of that idea of sort of getting sucked in. So I'm generally good at it, but it's hard. I mean, it's really difficult. I'm writing another book now, and I try to turn off my internet for hours in the day so I can actually get the work finished, get the writing done at that uninterrupted, concentrated time. But it's hard. It's just a click to turn it back on. And I have programs that disable social media and other functions for periods of time. But that temptation is always there, just when you want a little hit of distraction or something. So that is tricky, and I think that shows the sort of power, but also that, the thing that a lot of people are trying to balance with analog technology. And that's one of the good things. And I think one of the advantages of analog technology is that it gives you something to replace digital technology with in that moment, right? You can replace it with a book. And once the book has your attention, it's not going to sort of pull it away by showing advertisements or messages or other things, right? It will capture it completely. Will be that kind of salve to the soul that's searching for that quiet.
Have you spoken to or interviewed any scientists about the phenomena you've experienced with the craving? I call it a craving, or I don't know, just I feel better when I'm around natural things or analog things than digital. It's strange, but I don't even know what you call the phenomena. But I wonder if you've spoken to any
Yeah.
scientists to try to characterize it in that way.
None of that research was sort of available, or nothing that I really looked into when I was doing research for the book. I've had contact with people in recent years about it, and I've talked to, one guy who I've become friends with, Adam Alter, who's a scientist at NYU and studies sort of things like gambling and that sort of pattern of behavior. He wrote a great book called, oh gosh, now I'm forgetting it, Disrupted, maybe. I'm terrible. I'm sorry, Adam. But it looked at the issue of the distraction, not just distraction, but the stress that comes with this, right? And the feeling of sort of being on that. I mean, I just personally know that I feel better when I'm away from my phone. I might have these twinges of sort of needing it or wanting it, but once it's genuinely away, if I put it in a drawer somewhere, or just leave it at home and leave the house, like, I don't worry about it. I don't crave it. I don't think it's there. But when it's next to me, it's always this thing calling me. Something could be new, something could be different, some email could arrive that could change your life, or who knows, maybe there's something you haven't found out yet. There's so many things to do. What do you want to do? And yet, when I'm actually engaged with it and pick it up, I don't get any of that. I get nothing but, just nothing really for a lot of the time. Like it can transfer information. I can get the emails, I can get the calls and so forth. But a lot of the time I'm just sitting there flicking away, looking for something to distract me over and over again. And the time just it's wasted time is the way I see it. I mean, it really genuinely is wasted time. That's for me personally, right? For everybody, it's different. But I don't have any memories that I carry with me of a good time I had on my phone or on my computer. I have no memories of something I said or did, or a conversation I had on social media one time. All my memories and all the things that I associate with good and joy are out in that real world, in that analog world.
Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of feel the same way. It's true, and the phone has a very strong pull. It's amazing when it's sitting next to you. You're right. I've had times where, I had a book to read, but then you get pulled onto the phone. You realize, damn, I wasted the 30 minutes I had to read now by doing nothing on the phone. So it's super powerful.
Yeah, and it's very hard for anyone to really sort of fight that. I mean, these things are built to addict us, like cigarettes.
So what's have you been out and just kind of like anthropologically observed people? Some that I've seen some they're just literally like, I don't know, they're just in their phones constantly, and some people don't seem to have that pull. It seems like, I mean, just to generalize, older people don't have that pull as much as younger people. But have you noticed anything in your daily life about how some interact with technology and others successfully don't?
I mean, I think it is down to that individual level and a sort of questioning of that power. I think the default is being sort of sucked into it. I don't think there's a lot of people who are just built and have that limited interest in it. And I think age has nothing to do with that. There are, with the exception of very elderly people, my old neighbors who are in their 80s and so on. My parents who are, in their early 70s. I mean, they're on that phone and iPad constantly, even when they have my kids there, and they're with their grandchildren. It's taking photos of the kids, and then, oh, there's an email. I mean, I think this behavior, why it's been so successful, it's so powerful, and really, like, it's something very, very difficult to sort of step back from. So I think the people who are good at stepping back from that are those who've really done it in a conscious way and made that conscious choice to step back from it and control that, limit it, and set their boundaries of when and where they're going to sort of do that. And that's something that's, admirable, but it's not something that you can really preach to people. I mean, there's times when my brother, who's a very heavy user of social media and his phone, or even my wife, who, as she started a business a year and a half ago, has really become much more engaged on it. And I'll say, hey, come on, like, I get immediately, it's like, oh, okay, Mr. Analog, all right, like, okay, Mr. Bossy, you can't, it's like telling people to be a vegan. You can't sort of do it. You have to just kind of make the choice by yourself. and allow people to come to that decision on their own.
Yeah, has it changed your life to write the book? And do you relate to people differently? Do they tease you and call you Mr. Analog? I mean, like, how has it changed your daily living?
Well, I think I think it really did make me realize what my limitations were and where I wanted to stand with this. And I think from the broader perspective beyond myself, what I saw in researching the book, which didn't just include sort of pleasurable consumer phenomenon like people going out and using Polaroid cameras again, or sort of records or books, but I took a deeper look into things like, the way that people work and the way that education happens and the place of digital technology and sort of future tech and these things, and how often it's been sort of sold as the solution without actually looking at the downsides of that, without evaluating it. And in many cases, like in the case of education, for example, you have schools rushing to buy, billions of dollars in tablets or e-learning systems, or online courses that end up being, really detrimental and having no advantage or even sort of a negative effect on learning and students. But it's too late. The money's been spent. They canceled, sports and music and drama in order to pay for it. And you continue to sort of see that. And so I think what's really stuck with me is this, this need to really evaluate technology on a user level, whether it's an individual level or a larger systems level, on what its actual merits are, right? I think there's this assumption that the new thing is better. It's pitched to us as the solution to the problem, right? It's pitched to us as the cure for whatever our ill is. And that is everything from an app that's being sold at some sort of tech entrepreneur demo day to, the Apple keynote speech selling the latest version of the iPhone or its software, right? This is going to solve this problem in your world or your life. And people go, oh, great. Okay, well, that's it. We need to sort of embrace this and out with the old, in with the new. But the reality is, it's just a tool. And sometimes that tool is going to be better and sometimes that isn't. And that's going to change based on who's using it and the circumstances of using it. And so I think, what I really sort of came away from a change is that, when it comes to technology, especially new technology, is it better is not something that you can take a look at right when it sort of comes out. It's something you actually have to take in and do an experiment with and see where it works for you. And I think for most people, there's a balance of what technologies work for them. And some of it's old and analog, and some of it's new and digital, and some of it's the newest version, and some of it's the middle version. And a lot of it is in combination. And I think that in my own life and sort of in a broader philosophical perspective is what I've really come away with this from.
Yeah, I remember being in a restaurant about 10 years ago, and this is probably the first time I noticed it, but, a couple were eating, and when they were done, they both went on their phones. I thought it was so odd. They weren't talking, they were just both on their phones, and it was just really weird, But now, unfortunately, you see that constantly, so.
Right, now you're that couple.
I try not to be, but my kids, they'll, if I let them, they'll all be on the phone during meals, and I'll just be there with my wife, which sometimes is okay, but it's they're really bad with it if you let them. So it's interesting to
Yeah, and so I think, look, your podcast focuses on these groundbreaking future technologies, but the reality is that when the future arrives, it's never this Star Trek, the next generation, idealistic kind of perfect version, right? It's more this messy Blade Runner version of it. And when we look back at the promise of past technologies and what they were going to do and how they were going to completely change and revolutionize the world, in some parts of it, it's turned out as rosily predicted. In other ways, it's turned out much worse. And usually it's this sort of mix, right? Think about social media. When the book came out, my book came out in the day of Donald Trump's election. So when the book came out at that period of time, the criticisms about social media and the internet in it, people were sort of like, well, that's not really true. And then within 3 months, everybody had sort of turned against it as they had seen the way that these things had been weaponized by people like the Russian intelligence services and other sort of actors, and even the companies themselves, that really sort of changed that perspective, right? And so, when we think about future technology, we have to remember the future is never going to be it never turns out in the way we predicted. and having skepticism around new technology is not being some sort of Luddite. It's actually being, an intelligent human being who is able to assess things that are coming with them and evaluate it based on experimentation, right? It's like the scientific method. It's somehow we abandon that in favor of the shiny new thing, where really we should be sort of, using our critical thinking to determine what works for us and what doesn't, what's best and what isn't, what's appropriate and what is not.
So what is your, you said you're working on a new book. What's that going to be about? Or is that something totally different?
Well, it's somewhat different. The book is called The Soul of an Entrepreneur, and it really looks at what it means to be an entrepreneur today, away from and sort of beyond the startup myth that Silicon Valley has sold us on for the past, 25, 30 years, which is really a very narrow slice of entrepreneurship, the sort of 1% or 0.5% of entrepreneurs that really fit into the very narrow box of how those companies are made. And the majority of entrepreneurs that are out there, ranging from the person with the dry cleaner to the farmers to family businesses to, those who want a lifestyle business, entrepreneurship for them means something for very different reasons, and we've lost sight of that. And so the book is sort of reclaiming the meaning of that and looking how we got there.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're right. The Hollywood version of entrepreneurship is the startup and, working all-nighters, and it's always involving tech and trying to get, huge funding valuations, selling it off to a big conglomerate. And you're right, that's a far cry from the average store that a family owns, or, maybe someone makes stuff to sell on eBay, or is completely different.
Yeah, and completely different even from the average software company. We're doing sort of enterprise software or something like that. It's become glamorized and romanticized in this outsized way. But it is such a narrow version of what entrepreneurship really looks like for most people. And what its real meaning is, what its essence is, right? It's this idea of like you build something and you crush it and you get an exit and, then you're the next Elon Musk. And for the reality is most people don't want that. It's not why they become entrepreneurs and not why they are entrepreneurs. They do it for various different reasons. And those reasons are just as valid, if not more, than sort of what the mythologized version is. So it'll be out in about 1 year, next April, 2020. And I'm just working on editing it and chipping it down to size.
What about the analog entrepreneur? Is there room for a chapter in there to link it to your book where you talk about people that creating analog experiences or non-digital experiences as part of entrepreneurship?
I think a lot of them are. Look, a lot of the people that I write about in this book, there's one woman who makes hair care products, shampoos and styling gels and stuff in New Orleans. There's Syrians who have opened up food and restaurant businesses here in Toronto. A woman who owns a coffee shop, someone in the wine business in Argentina. I mean, most of the products, most of the businesses, most of the economy is analog. That's the reality of it, right? We obviously are captured by, the valuations and the dollar signs around, the businesses that are created in Silicon Valley and in the tech world, but they are a part and an integral part of the economy. And obviously digital technology is involved in all sorts of businesses, even the restaurant, when the food vendor needs their Square app to charge on credit card or, use things for inventory or promote on social media. But, the economy, the real world, it's still most of the value is still derived from that. The entire world of food, there's, you can talk all about Soylent and sort of Silicon Valley veggie burgers all you want, but the fact is like that food economy happens in the real world. Nothing is built without construction workers and materials. But the analog entrepreneur still dominates the economy.
What do you think would happen if the movie Ready Player One, how there was like this massive virtual reality world, and
right,
in the movie everyone ran to it and lived in it because the real world was awful. But what if that was available today? Do you think that?
I mean, the Second Life still exists. Well, it does. It's called social media, and it's been taken over by Nazis. So, I think like that, the Instagram is the real version of that. Let's aside from World of Warcraft and all the different online games, the reality is like that's what social media is, right? That's what Instagram is, that's what Twitter is, that's what all these things are. And it's a paltry substitute for real life. It's like it's the sugar, it's the sugar water, it's the candy. It doesn't give us any sort of nutrition for the soul and socialization and all these things. It's just entertainment. And you see something like Second Life, which was the sort of biggest example of what that was supposed to be. I mean, it just basically is an abandoned virtual world. Doesn't mean that virtual reality games will come along in the future and, totally change, entertainment. And there'll be all sorts of wonderful experiences you could have that are, more engaging than, say, watching Netflix or playing just a basic video game today. Of course, that's going to happen. But, it's still going to be more fun and more engaging to go out and go bowling with friends than it is to play some virtual reality video game called Bowling with Friends. That's reality. And reality is still where the action is, right?
Well, thank goodness. Yes, that's true.
I thought you were going to be like, no, wrong. Yeah. And that's right? As long as we live in the real world, it's the real world that gives us still the most pleasure. It's been raining here in Toronto the past month, in kind of a crappy spring. And today it's sunny. It's supposed to get raining the rest of the week. So I'm going to go out and walk the dog right now so I can feel the sun on my face and hear the birds and smell the trees starting to bloom and sort of see people, right? Design me a virtual reality experience for that. It's not going to feel as good. It's going to be a simulate. Someone said this to me when I interviewed them for the book, and I totally forget who it is, but it was really, really smart. So I'm just going to take it. They said that, the best digital can ever do is simulate reality as best it can, right? The best virtual reality experience, the best digital experience is doing the best it can at simulating the analog world and the real experience, the touch of it, the feel of it, the look of it, the texture of it, trying to sort of mimic it and trick you into it. So it can never live up to that. It does its own thing, and it does something that analog can't, but can't do it all. And reality's still where it's at.
Yeah, true. I guess the best we can have is augmented reality, but reality is still the cornerstone and the thing that we crave. So yeah, makes total sense.
Yeah, and even then, now I think about it, last spring at this time was when that Pokemon Go thing came out. And I remember going to the park with my kids or whatever at the end of our street, and there was just like hundreds of people playing this game, hundreds of people looking for Pikachus or whatever the heck they were looking for all over. And within like a month, they just disappeared. They went away. It was summer and it was nicer out, and they would rather throw Frisbee or whatever.
Well, thank goodness that reality wins. Otherwise, the world might be a very strange and unhappy place.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, interesting. So, last question or two. Do you feel like your perception of things has changed since you wrote the book, or it just kind of gave credence to what you already thought and have experienced, or like how has it changed you, and any feedback from readers on how it's changed their life? Anything that's interesting to you?
I mean, some of the most interesting feedback I got and perspectives I got, and I think the perspectives that sort of inform my thinking on it, has been from people who actually work in, digital industries, let's say, digital fields, right? People who are programmers or designers, computer scientists, who are some of the people that have actually been the ones who appreciate this stuff most keenly, whether it's in their spare time. They design websites by day, they work on databases by day, but at night they, collect records or play board games or, design letterpress, to just understanding the value of that within the companies they do. I have a friend named Mike Murchison, who here in Toronto is, a startup entrepreneur. He's got his fourth company now. It's called Ada. I think they do machine learning consumer support. So when you call into, I think maybe AT&T or one of these companies for help, or go on their chat thing, like they make the chat bot that goes in the other end and of various other companies. So, it's very sort of forward thinking, future level. And yet in his company, he's mandated certain parts of the process be done in an analog way on whiteboard or paper or face to face, because, he appreciates the value of that process in making the product better, even if the product at the end of the day is, artificial intelligence. And so I think, that there's that, I kind of expected that community to be the one to be the most skeptical of sort of analog value, but in many ways, because they deal with digital technology day to day, they understand really how it works, and they understand its limitations. They appreciate the place that the non-digital actually plays in the world, and are willing to use it for their own personal selves or for their work in sort of a deeper, more engaging way.
Very good. So, what's the best way for listeners to find out more about what you do? I guess to get Revenge of the Analog if they haven't gotten it already on Amazon and Kindle and everywhere. And then
the new book is called The Soul of an Entrepreneur. It'll be out in another year, in April 2020. So hold your breath till then, and pre-order it, I guess, or ask your bookstore to carry it. And then you can follow me very sporadically, since I barely post, at SackDavid at Twitter. I'm rarely there, especially these days. I've actually installed a plugin to limit my entire social media time to 10 minutes within a 24-hour period. And that has been a wonderfully liberating thing. And it just locks you out when you're done with that 10 minutes. And you know what? 10 minutes is plenty. It's enough. It's more than enough.
Yeah, 10 minutes actually probably is plenty. That's true.
Yeah, like you can read a few things, you can get caught up, you can make a few, conversations or sort of jokes, and then you're out. It's like, all right, save it till tomorrow, buddy. Go do something with your life.
Very good. Well, David, thanks for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your insights.
Listen, thanks for having me. It's my absolute pleasure. I really appreciate it.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.